Welcome to the channel. In this video, I'm going to discuss the concepts of TOD and POD, or transfer on death and payable on death. What do they mean and how do they work? Both of these concepts do the exact same thing, which allows someone's assets upon their passing to bypass the probate process and go directly to the named beneficiaries. There are two types of beneficiaries, which are called primary and contingent. The primary beneficiaries have first claim to the asset, and then the contingents, if all beneficiaries are not alive, can then claim the asset. TOD, or transfer on death, is used for assets that are titled to someone, like property, such as deeds, titles, and investment accounts. When it comes to deeds and titles, there is a concept of a ladybird deed or a transfer on death deed that can be filed prior to someone's death with the county to help with the process. While the TOD designation is listed on the accounts themselves, so that when a person passes, the beneficiaries can call up and claim rights to those accounts. When it comes to mortgages, there is a concept called successor. What this means is that if one is named as a successor on a mortgage, the mortgage does not need to be paid back right away after the person passes. Payments can now be made by the successor, so the property doesn't necessarily need to be sold off or refinanced at the time of the passing. This works out really well, especially if the interest rate is low. So, for example, say someone was able to get a 1, 2, or 3% interest rate, and now interest rates on mortgages are between 7 to 9%. With being listed as successor to the mortgage, they are able to take over the mortgage at that same interest rate without needing to refinance it or having to pay it fully off. So because of that, it can help with keeping the property after someone passes, because someone doesn't feel that they have the funds to pay for everything. Cell phone bills, cable, and other utilities will permit the executor of the will or other people on the plan to take over the ownership on the utility as long as they can provide the proper documentation, such as the death certificate, the will, or some other component that lists them on those utilities. So, for example, if you are listed on a cell phone plan with someone that passes, you can take over the rights to be the owner of the cell phone plan by showing the death certificate and other documentation they might want. POD, or payable on death, is used for assets in bank accounts, such as checking and savings accounts. A beneficiary can be anyone or an entity, meaning it can be a person, a trust, a charity, a school, a university, or even a religious organization or the government themselves. Using these designations on any account overrides the provisions that might appear in someone's will. So it is important to not set them up and forget about them. If life changes occur, one needs to remember to update these designations on every account. Otherwise, final wishes may not be accurate anymore. As I just mentioned, using the TOD and POD designation on an account bypasses the probate process because it means that the executor of the will and the probate system do not need to be involved with the transfer of the asset. Typically, someone may think that this makes sense so that heirs have access to funds for burial costs and other final expenses without having to wait for the probate process to be completed. However, that is not always the case. First off, beneficiaries of any account, if they wish, are legally allowed to keep them and not use them for the burial or any estate expenses. They can think of them as inheritance or a donation right away. So if you are the executor and all accounts are set up in this manner to people or entities that will not return funds back to the estate first to pay for the person's final expenses, you have no legal standing to fight them. And this will then mean that all final expenses will come from whatever is left or out of the executor's own pocket or from family members that will chip in to pay for final expenses. As an example, I discussed with one financial institution a situation where a brother was named executor to his other brother's estate. The brokerage account had 32 named beneficiaries, including him, such as other family members, the brother's priest, nun, schools, and various charities that the brother wished to give money to. This left little to nothing to bury the brother, so he needed to work with them to establish a financial vehicle to reclaim the funds after each person claimed them. And again, that is if they all agreed to do this. This is why choosing people or entities to be listed as part of a TOD or POD designation on any account or asset is extremely important. They must be trustworthy to respect your wishes after you pass and not keep funds to themselves unless you have already created other means by which to handle your final expenses and the holding costs that will occur on your assets before they are able to be transferred from your name to someone else's name upon your passing. Therefore, the ideal thing to do, if at all possible, is to have one's estate make all intrinsic assets or assets that have some form of monetary value be transferred into a trust upon death, or they are already within a trust before the person passes. Then the terms of the trust handles the asset distribution by the successor trustees of the trust. And then the beneficiaries of the trust then get funds after all affairs are handled. Obviously, not everyone will establish a trust because their estate may not be large enough to merit it, or they trust their heirs to do the right thing and honor their wishes and stick to the game plan listed in the will. Unfortunately, upon one's passing, people tend to change and they may not always act the way you think or hope they will. Hopefully this video gives you some insights into these topics, and you now have something to think about as you start preparing to update your accounts with these designations. As always, like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone you feel can benefit from this information. Also, feel free to leave any comments, and I will try to answer them best I can. Depending on what comments are left, it might require me to make additional videos, so feel free to ask them, and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as I can.